Hi, my name is Minuk Kim from Group 10. Today our group will be doing a presentation about intercultural communication in the UAE. Before we start our presentation, I'd like to ask you guys a question. Have you ever heard of the UAE? If you have ever been to Europe or Africa, you have probably heard of or visited the UAE. But since a lot of people only visit the UAE to transfer planes, those people don't know much about UAE culture or their communication style. So in this presentation, we would like to talk about the UAE culture and the characteristics of intercultural communication in the UAE. Before learning about their communication style, it is necessary to first understand their socio-cultural characteristics. First, in a geographical perspective, the UAE is a very small country. It is almost 1.2 times smaller than Korea. Most of the UAE's land is desert, which means the 9 million people living in the UAE are all packed in the seaside cities. So they live and coexist in one very small place. So everyone knows the same landmarks, malls, restaurants, and maybe even the same people. However, despite its size, the UAE has people from diverse cultural backgrounds living together. As the graph shows, only 11% of the UAE population is local, and more than 80% of the population are expats from other cultures such as India and the Philippines, and so on. Due to these characteristics, tolerance is considered a very important value in the UAE. In particular, an attitude of understanding and respecting different cultures is the key of communication in the UAE. So most people in the UAE usually have an open mind and enjoy learning about each other's culture. Although countless people from different cultural backgrounds live in the UAE, its culture is heavily based on Islam. The UAE is one of the countries governed by Islamic law, and these cultural characteristics are reflected in their communication style. So people who don't know about Islam or UAE culture often misunderstand certain things when communicating with UAE people. Okay, so what are the characteristics of communication in the UAE? To explain their communication style effectively, we have prepared 3 short role plays, so let's watch it together.
Have you guys seen the movie Frozen?
No, I can't because that's very busy. Homeworking is very. Have you ever seen?
No, I haven't either.
Do you guys want to see it win me later?
Yeah, sure. Let's go. I want to see it.
Inshallah.
Okay, what about going for chicken tonight?
Okay, let's go. I love chicken.
Inshallah.
What does inshallah even mean?
While watching a short role play, you probably heard an unfamiliar word, that is inshallah. What does inshallah mean? According to the dictionary, inshallah is a type of idiom that Muslims usually use, and the literal meaning of inshallah is if God is willing or if God permits it, it will happen. So is the meaning of inshallah negative or is it positive? The answer is both. It just changes its meaning completely depending on the situation. Sometimes it means no, and sometimes it means I will do my best. Therefore, if you heard inshallah when communicating with UAE people, you must understand its meaning by considering the situation or by the way they say it.
Where is it? My friend, do you know where the drugstore is?
roaster. Near the big building over there. Okay.
شكرا. Hi, welcome.
Do you have masks?
Are you okay?
Sick.
We have K94 and K80.
Which one is better? This one or this one?
Same.
As I mentioned in the social cultural characteristics, UAE people mostly live together in the one small city and share the same experience. Therefore, even if they say near that big building, they can easily understand which building is the big building that he mentioned. With these geographical characteristics and the influence of Arab culture, UAE people's communication style is based on the high context. Also, slang is the good example of high context communication in the UAE. UAE people use a lot of slang in the communication. Among countless slang, the most commonly used slang are my friend and same. My friend is often used when addressing strangers. It is a polite and friendly way of talking to people. Same is mainly used when you are trying to point out similarity. For example, if something looks slightly different but it works similarly, they use same. Therefore, if you have any chance to communicate with UAE people, you must consider these characteristics of communication. And if you don't understand what they said, you can just ask them again. Characteristic of communication in the UAE is hand gestures. As mentioned earlier, UAE people use slang a lot in the communication, but hand gestures are also very much used. And these hand gestures have many meanings. So in order to better communicate with people in the UAE, it is basically necessary to know the meaning of some of the hand gestures they often use. So actually, we prepared 2 hand gestures that UAE people use a lot in their communication process, so let's learn together. First is the shoe, and it's used by taking your hand, raising it up, twisting it 180 degrees, and 3 of your last fingers are up in the air. This hand gesture is used to talk about confusion in the communication. Second is the shuai shuai. It's taking the palm of your hand, bringing all your fingers together and then lifting it up and down. This is usually used to indicate for someone to take it easy or to slow down. In conclusion, intercultural communication in the UAE has the following characteristics. First, their communication style is based on Islamic culture, and because of this, expressions such as inshallah derived from religion are used. Second, because of its geographical characteristics, their way of communication is based on the very high context and many slangs are used. Third, they use hand gestures with various meanings in the process of communication. Although it was a short presentation, we hope that many students learned a little more about the UAE's culture and their communication styles through our presentation. Thank you. Or as we say in the UAE, shukran.